Hi, my name is Elijah King, and I come from Southside Church of Christ. There's never a single second where something doesn't go wrong somewhere. We don't always know it, we don't always acknowledge it, but every day there are people suffering in the world, and we can't do a thing about that fact. But I tell you, there's nuance to this. There is. Because as all of these bad things are happening around us, there's still so much good. I mean, why are most of us here, right? We're here to preach, learn how to preach the word. And that's good. That's good news. Why are the counselors here? They're here to mentor us and guide us onto a path of righteousness and godliness. That's good news. So I think it's time that we find the gospel in tragedy. Now, what do I mean by that? Gospel in tragedy. Well, let me take you back personally to 2017. It's spring break. It's going pretty good. I'm hanging out with my cousin. We're riding scooters down his super steep hill, which that's foreshadowing, by the way, because long story short, I broke my arm. I had to leave early. I had to wear bags over my cast when I went to the shower. Not only that, but right after it healed, I broke it again. And that was at camp. I never got to swim that summer. I was super bummed. But you know what? There's good in that. Let's find the good. You all know that, camp food is just kind of meh. But since I had just broken my arm, every day I went out during lunch and I got Wendy's after I got a checkup. And you got that big, juicy, double bacon egg. You get the idea. It was good. And when I got home, no chores for me. I had a broken arm. I didn't have to do dishes. I didn't have to mow the lawn. And even though most of the messes were me, I didn't have to clean the bathroom. Leave it to the siblings. Now that's a pretty mellow example. So let's all turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 10, if you will. Thank you. And while you're doing that, let me give you kind of the rundown here. King Saul. This is what this is about. King Saul. More evil than the wicked witch of the west. More despicable than Gru from Minions. And further into the dark side than Darth Vader himself. In all seriousness, King Saul was a horrible king. He was described to be a horrible king. And when he ruled over Israel, doomed it from the start. He was bad. And as good kings were compared to Solomon or David, King Saul was the bar for bad kings. The standard, the checklist for when a bad king came into power. This guy's like Saul. And the greatest testimony as to why this is in 1 Chronicles chapter 10. Would you please read it with me? The Philistines fought against Israel. The men of Israel ran away from them. But many Israelites were killed on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines kept chasing Saul and his sons. They killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting was heavy around Saul. Men who were armed with bows and arrows caught up with them. They shot their arrows at him and wounded him badly. Saul spoke to the man who was carrying his armor. He said, "Pull out your sword and stick it through me. If you don't, these men who are uncircumcised will come and hurt me badly." In other words, they would torture him and kill him. But the man was terrified. He couldn't do it. He would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the man saw that he was dead, he too fell on his own sword and died. Saul and his 3 sons died. All of them died together. All the Israelites who lived in the valley saw that their army had run away. They saw that Saul and his sons were dead, so they left their towns and ran away. And then the Philistines came and settled down in them. The day after the Philistines had won the battle, they came to take what they wanted from the dead bodies. They found Saul and his sons dead on Mount Gilboa, so they took what they wanted from Saul's body. They took his head and his armor. They sent messengers through the whole land of the Philistines, and they announced the news to their statues of their gods. They put Saul's armor in the temple of their gods. They hung his head up in the temple of their god Dagon. That is a tragedy. It really is. And I know it sounds depressing. However, today we find the gospel in these kinds of tragedies. Why don't we just go ahead and read on, shall we? Let's read the rest of that chapter. the people of Jabesh Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul. So all of their brave men went and got the bodies of Saul and his sons. They brought them to Jabesh. Then they buried the bones of Saul and his sons under the great tree that was there. They didn't eat anything for 7 days. Saul died because he wasn't faithful to the Lord. He didn't obey the word of the Lord. He even asked for advice from a person who gets messages from those who have died, a medium. He didn't ask the Lord for advice, so the Lord put him to death. He turned the kingdom over to David. David was the son of Jesse. There it is. There it is. Good news. If you didn't catch it, let me help you out here. There are a few things to point out. Who comes and gets Saul and his sons after they got killed on Mount Gilboa? Brave men. Brave men from Jabesh. The same people who he actually saved at the beginning of his reign. In 1 Samuel chapter 11, the start of his reign, he saved the people of Jabesh Gilboa. And they remembered his good deeds, and they honored him by burying his body. Another thing, his sons. They let themselves die for their father, who they all knew was a bad guy. They were remembered for trying to be better than their father. In fact, we actually know about Jonathan, one of his sons, because in 1 Samuel chapter 20, he actually helped David while he was being chased by Saul and his men trying to kill him. Jonathan is disobeying, in a way, Saul by trying to help David, which is the right thing to do. That's good news. And lastly, there's hope. I want to read that last verse in 1 Chronicles 10. He turned the kingdom over to David. David was the son of Jesse. David. We talked about David. He's one of the good kings, the one who set the bar, the one who was standard for good king. Here he comes. Rejoice. David is here, a hope for a better era of Israel. Now, you don't have to look for the good news in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day tragedies. But you should be the good news. Act out the gospel. Be better than those before you, and be good. As good as the good news in the life of Jesus Christ. And we all know his is the most tragic story of all. But what do we call it still? We call it the gospel, the good news. I still want you to remember that there is never a single second where something doesn't go wrong somewhere. We don't always know it. We don't always acknowledge it. But every day there are people suffering in the world, and we can't do anything about it. But I tell you, there's nuance to this. There is. It's more complicated than you think, because when all of these bad things are happening, there is still so much good in the world. And I want you to think for a moment, are you being the good news? Are you being the gospel in tragedy?